Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Some Random Thoughts. My name is Ryan Molkowski, and I have on the program with me today a very special guest. Her name is Brittany Bruton. She resides in the Atlanta, Georgia area. She's a wonderful person. She talks a lot about her family. She talks about womanhood. She talks about self-care. She talks about a lot of the important topics that we have to talk about in this day, but she writes from her unique perspectives. She also writes a lot about her chronic illness. And so if any of those topics interest you, please go check her out. And Brittany, introduce yourself to the audience, and where can people find you on social media and websites and things like that?
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. I'm really excited to be on the podcast. I've been enjoying going through season 1 and just excited to talk to you today.
Awesome.
But yeah, my blog is brittanyandbloom.com, and I post mostly on Instagram. My Instagram is Brit in Bloom, just the letter N. And yeah, I am an educator. I am out this year on medical leave, just kind of sorting through my chronic illness, as you mentioned,
Yeah.
and also a wife and a mom. I have a, a really rambunctious, almost 2-year-old who keeps us
Aw.
really, really busy.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, you know how that goes.
Yeah.
Toddler life.
Yeah.
And yeah, just a friend, sister. I really value relationships and getting to know people and connecting. And so I'm just really excited to talk and just share some thoughts today.
Thank you so much, Brittany, for being here to introduce you all to what we're going to be talking about. So, Brittany is joining me on a revisit episode from season 1, and that episode is on racism and whiteness. This is a very difficult conversation, and so I deeply appreciate even more Brittany being willing to come on, talk about her lived experience, her unique perspective. She is going to share a lot of important things about what we're going to talk about. And the reason why I brought Brittany on is because she's really great at having conversations, and she's just very charitable. And as a white person, I just, it's already a difficult thing. And I wanted to bring her on because I wanted to show this is not an intellectual exercise. These topics are real. They affect millions of people. There's been a lot of detriment and injustice and inequality that continues to happen, and we need to have these conversations. And really, I just want to open up this episode for her to talk about where do we as white people get it right? Where do we get it wrong? What do we need to work on? What are some steps we need to take? What are some resources we need to engage in? And how to have and not have these particular conversations. I want to talk about, as a white person, like, how can I have a good conversation with someone about this? And how can I have a really bad conversation? What do I need to step away from and stay away from? And what do I need to engage in? Because I think as white people, or me as a white person, I should say, it's really easy that if I am too cautious and I don't want to tiptoe, then what happens is that leads to an action.
Mm.
And white people don't need to be complicit in not acting on trying to find a way forward for greater equality and greater justice for Black and brown people of color. And at the same time, we don't want to overstep our bounds and actually cause more trauma and more pain and more hurt in trying to maybe help and be allies. And so, Brittany, I thank you so much for being here, and I hope you will help us maybe a little bit on how to navigate these things. So,
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, the first thing I want to ask you is I spent a good portion, maybe the first third of that episode, which you can listen to season 1 right now, anywhere you get your podcasts. I spent the first third of the episode talking about whiteness. And I think a lot of people are very confused about, first of all, what is whiteness? Second of all, how does it affect us individually and societally? And third of all, there's going to be just a lot of denial in general. I've seen and I've heard from people that I know personally and just all over social media. There's this denial for some reason about the impact of whiteness or the reality of whiteness and how it plays out in our society. And for those of you who are listening internationally, we're speaking from a United States perspective, okay? We're United States citizens. And so if it's different where you are, sorry, but this is an important conversation. And so I wanted to have it. So Brittany, first of all, tell me about kind of your understanding of what whiteness is and your perceived, I guess, your perceived experience with it. And we'll just, go from there.
Yeah, that's a great question. When I think about whiteness, I really think about a weapon. And the
Okay.
reason that I say that is because if you were to go back, I'm a social studies teacher. I've always taught middle school, and I actually taught freshmen for a little while, but social studies and history is kind of my thing. So if you go
Hmm.
back to, the 1400s, 1500s in Europe, there were not white people. There were Spanish people and Portuguese and French and all of that. And they actually were not friends. If
Okay.
you look, they were competing with each other for colonies and for power and things like that.
Yeah.
But as people start to come to the Americas, and as they start to build here in America, whiteness starts to become a thing, because now we've got to have some way to assert power over other groups of people who are here, or who are at least going to come here. And so whiteness became a way to really like band together and to say like, hey, this is one social class that is here, and then people who are indigenous will be a social class, and then people who are black are going to be, a lower social class, and that sort of thing. So I really think of it as a weapon. And when I see people who wield their whiteness now, I often think about like white women who, they will, what is it, like, use their tears or like their feelings, they'll call
Mm,
the police and say, oh, these people were barbecuing and it made me upset, and they'll cry. And it's like,
wow. Yeah.
how do there'll be a group of people doing something that doesn't bother you. They're not talking to you at
Right.
all. And then when the police show up, you'll cry and say that they bothered you, because you know that it will encourage the police to inflict violence on black people who are not bothering you. And so, we can go back to Emmett Till.
Yeah.
There's lots and lots of different examples of, whiteness wielding its power to be violent towards black people. And so that's what I think of. And not even just like in a physical sense, but also in like an economic sense. We just saw the 100th year, I don't want to say commemoration, but
Right.
100th year anniversary, I guess it would be, of
Right.
the Tulsa race
Ah,
massacre,
yeah.
where,
Black Wall
y-
Street. Yeah.
yeah, Black Wall Street. And, black people lost billions and billions of dollars worth of property, land. I mean, you
Yeah.
name it. It was horrendous, and they haven't been paid back for that. And there's
Mm,
not just the Tulsa Black Wall Street that was destroyed. There were dozens, there were lots and lots of places here in the United States where black people were building and were creating something and were working
right.
hard. And whiteness allowed, a mob of people to come in and destroy everything they work for and never be paid back. No justice was ever served. So yeah, that's kind of what I think about whiteness. It's always a weapon. It's never used in it's never been a good thing for black people.
That's really, really great to hear, because the first time I heard that whiteness is a weapon,
Hmm.
obviously as a white person, the first response I wanted to have was this extreme defensiveness,
Right.
which I think a lot of people have when they hear these terms. But then
Hmm.
if we can just let our nervous system calm down and just really
Right.
look at things rationally and critically, I started to open up my eyes and go, oh my God, they're right.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
whiteness is a weapon because it's a social construct that was
Hmm.
created in the ways you just described. I also appreciate, because you have a background as an educator in social studies and history specifically, you have this really intimate knowledge and understanding of the mechanisms of how things work. Have you seen a whitewashing of history? Because I remember because throughout like my education, I went to a Christian school, independent
Hmm.
fundamentalist Baptist Christian school from 6 through 12. And so
Okay.
I think what I noticed without even really realizing it, because of just the indoctrination kind of thing
Right.
that was happening with me, that was kind of coinciding with my spirituality at the time, was I felt like things were very whitewashed. Like it felt
Hmm.
like what we called American exceptionalism is just whiteness with a
Yeah.
really pretty veil.
Right.
And it was just like, now when I started like really studying this like in my late 20s and 30s, and I was like, oh my God, what kind of education was I getting, that we're promoting like
Yeah.
this weapon, but we're saying it's exceptional and it made the greatest country in the world and all
Right.
these things. So have you seen a whitewashing in history or experienced it through textbooks and maybe having discussions with colleagues or just people you know? And what are some of the problems that we're seeing in even education of our young children in our society?
Yeah. Well, I mean, right now, if you've been on Twitter at all, there's like a big uproar over critical race theory, which is,
Yep.
is very complex. I mean, but people have heard the word, they've heard this phrase critical race theory and they don't know what it is. I mean,
Yep. Yep.
I never taught that to sixth graders. Like I
Right.
wasn't even teaching American history. So this was not like, it's very small. Like the information that we give kids in K through 12, like
Hmm.
unless they're taking AP classes or something, they're getting like very small bites of information. And
Okay.
then we give them a test, like we're hitting the
Yeah.
state standards and we're moving on. But there's this wave of people who think that their kids are going to be taught something. They think that we're telling their kids that they're bad because they're white, and nobody's
Mm.
saying that. Like,
Okay.
I mean, there are events that you can look at in history and you can say, wow, whiteness has really allowed some white people to do really horrible things to other people, but
Yeah.
nobody, I mean, I can't imagine. I mean, maybe there are people who would do that in the classroom, but
Hmm.
I could never imagine myself. I don't have any coworkers that I could think of who would say, oh yes, white, you're a bad person because you're white. I think that's pretty unlikely.
Okay.
Pretty unlikely that that's going to happen. But a lot of people are really afraid of their kids knowing history, and I think that that's really
Mm.
sad because when we don't know history, we're going to definitely repeat it, and
Yep.
people don't realize it. By trying to ban the truth and the hard parts of history from being shared with their kids, that they're raising children. They're trying to create an environment that's going to raise children who are going to do the same things and be the same sorts of people that their parents are.
Yeah.
And when it comes to a lot of the private, church schools, I'm a product of a Christian school as well. I went to Christian school for a while.
Okay.
My Christian school was run by our Black church, so my experience might have been a little bit different from yours. But
Yeah.
when we look at the history of Christian schools here in America too, a lot of them were created as a result of prayer being taken out of schools, and then also
Mm.
integration. So
Mm.
they were, basically like, hey, let's take all of our kids away because these Black kids are coming to school. So
Wow.
we're
That's
going
a
to
good
teach
point.
them we're going to teach them whatever we want to teach them. And, generally homeschool and private schools aren't really, the government doesn't have a lot of oversight in what you're being taught. So.
So, yeah, Brittany, you've talked a lot about, education, being a middle school teacher, doing social studies and history. So, where have you seen maybe has there been a problem with textbooks and maybe incorrectly or just blatantly getting the idea about racism and about whiteness and things of those natures wrong? Where have you seen those things maybe happen, or how is that happening amongst your colleagues, or what do your colleagues feel about it overall?
Yeah, for sure. So, right now, if you've been at all like on Twitter and social media, there's been a big fuss about critical race theory,
Yeah.
and schools and states really like joining together, getting together really quickly to write laws to ban the teaching of critical race theory, which, in K through 12 education, most people probably aren't really using a whole lot of critical race theory. I had to look up, the 12 parts of it to really understand what it was talking about. And so, I think that people are reacting. They're really like reacting out of like it doesn't really make sense the way that they're reacting. I'll just put it that way
Right.
because
Right.
I think that they're thinking that teachers are going to tell their kids you're a bad person because you're white. And I just can't see anybody who's teaching kids, social studies or history, and using the state standards. Like there's no state standard in any state that's going to say you're bad because you're white,
Yeah.
explain to students that, that concept or anything.
Yeah.
So, and then when we talk about textbooks, there have been public school textbooks, private school textbooks that have gotten it wrong. A couple of years ago, I remember seeing a textbook that said that enslaved people were laborers, and they
Mm.
were not laborers. Like laborers are paid for their labor.
Right.
And so, sometimes in not wanting to tell kids the full story or tell them how bad things are, sometimes people will try to, kind of water things down. But labor and enslavement, like labor and enslaved, those are two completely different types of situations. And so we need to be honest with kids about what's going on. And so, you mentioned too, like, I know that you went to like a private Christian
Right.
school.
Privates.
I
Yep.
also Yeah, I also went to a private Christian school that was run by my church, and I grew up in a Black church in a pretty white denomination. But in my church school, I think that my teachers did a pretty good job of giving us, some history. Like there was always Black History Month celebrations, and we touched on kind of like where we've come from as a people. But there were, we didn't get really really deep into it in elementary school, but there were definitely we were definitely introduced to some things. I think that allowed us to become pretty knowledgeable about our history as Black people. So I'm grateful for that. But I
Yeah.
also recognize that the history of a lot of private Christian schools in America was a response to integration in schools and wanting to keep white and Black kids separate. So, that kind of tells us a lot about what may have been left out of education for kids who went to like, schools that started like that.
Yeah, that's an excellent point because I think I wasn't even thinking when I went to when I went to my private school and had my private school education. It was a mostly white school, very few people of color at the school, and but the textbooks seemed very problematic because it seemed like there wasn't a lot of discussion about ownership of all of the ills that
Hmm.
America has perpetuated on Black and brown people of color. It just seemed like they glossed over things. Like, for example,
Yeah.
there was an argument that was in my history class in high school where we were talking about what were the reasons for the Civil War starting
Oh.
between the North and the South. And what I learned was that it was not about slavery, but it was about
Hmm.
states' rights, is
Right.
how they couched it. And so there was actually a Black person in my class who raised their hand and said, no, let's be honest. The
Yeah.
reason why this happened was because of slavery. And my white history teacher immediately scolded him,
Hmm.
rebuked him
Yeah.
for even mentioning that it could have been that reason. And then as I'm like reading about history of just on the Civil War, it's like, no, why are we trying to gloss over or whitewash
Yeah.
the reason why this happened? It was completely about slavery because slavery was directly connected to the economy. If
Hmm.
you can no longer
Yep.
enslave people to produce and you actually
Yeah.
have to pay people, like you said, for their labor, that was going to completely shift the power dynamics in the economy itself. And that's why there was a huge uproar about
Yeah.
maintaining slavery versus abolishing slavery. And so that's just one example, I think, of the many examples of how some textbooks completely um, dismiss and they try to gloss over the real problems and sins and social ills that America has
Right.
perpetuated upon people of color for centuries.
For
And
sure.
so for you to be able to discuss from an educated perspective how, maybe textbooks are maybe getting it more right, but you've seen textbooks and you've mentioned
Yeah.
examples of how textbooks have gotten it very wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, would you say probably that's because of maybe who's in charge of writing the textbooks
Oh,
and
yeah.
stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, if you follow, I always say follow the money and then look at who's, in charge.
Okay.
It even here in Georgia, what was it last week, maybe Friday, the Georgia State School Board voted and wrote a resolution about critical race theory and all that. And I mean, if you literally look up
Oh
the Georgia
man.
School Board, there's like three Black people. There's like
Out of
I think 13 people or 16 people or something, and
wow.
maybe three are Black. And then if you look at public ed isn't becoming increasingly more Black and brown. And so, even here in our
Really?
county, yeah, even here in our county, we've seen the school board here in where we live
Yep.
recently flipped, and
I remember that.
it's been a mess. Those board meetings and the parents and the things that have been going
Oh
on.
man.
So, that hold on power does not really, it doesn't like release itself easily. It's a real fight. So yeah, I mean, if we look at who's writing the textbooks and who's writing the state standards and who is on the school boards and that sort of thing, I think that we start to get a lot of answers.
Have there been disadvantages toward people of color in education, whether it's teachers and administration or students? And if so, if there's been a disproportionate amount of maybe inequities in pay or inequities in maybe how people of color are treated, student, teacher, administration, has that been happening in the school system, and is that just because of power dynamics as well, like you said, because you're going to the school board, so you're trying to follow the top and you're following the money, like you said. Have you had experiences with that as an educator and things like that?
Well, if you look at public ed, most teachers in America are white women. But
Okay.
like I said, most of the kids who go to public school are Black and brown. It's becoming increasingly more. I don't want to say most kids that go are Black and brown, but if you look at the numbers of who is going or who's staying in public ed, the numbers of Black and brown kids are increasing.
Okay. Gotcha.
But what we see is that white, like parents and admin and they tend to kind of hold on to the power of the local school system. Like I said, we just saw ours flip, but on a local level, what I've seen is, and there's, I think our school district is having some meetings about this as well, because this is an issue that was brought up, is the discrepancies in discipline between Black and brown kids and then white children who commit the same offense or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. Okay.
And, I've seen it.
Okay.
I've been in meetings where I'm calling my lawyer, everything becomes like a lawyer thing. It's like your kid has detention. Like they really did the wrong thing.
Right.
Like you don't have to, and I think that accountability is, there's always like this expectation that like, Black kids are like, they automatically did it. They're automatically like bad,
Mm,
they're inherently problematic. And then with white children, it's like, no, they didn't, no way. Like my kid couldn't have done that, and so even like the language around kids, when kids get in trouble or when kids do things, you can just hear the differences in how people speak about Black and brown kids versus how they speak about white children. And
wow.
so, what we see is, and I mean, there's even data too that talks about like how successful children are based on the number of Black teachers they have. But there is, I don't want to quote anything wrong, but there's data
Right.
that says that Black children who have Black teachers are more likely to go further in their education and things like
Wow.
that.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's, there are real implications to who's in classrooms. And like, I know that in my experience, a lot of times I was the go to her room, go sit in her room, get out of here and go sit in her room. And I'd have kids who sat in my room twice instead of going to science that day or instead of going to math that day, because, I'm the Black teacher, they're Black kids. So I should be able to kind of help them sort out whatever they have going on. And I mean, sadly, if that would keep them out of, being suspended or something like that, I would let them sit in my room and do their work.
Mm,
But there's just a lack of understanding, I think, between white, oftentimes like white middle class women and Black children. Like it just, a lot of times, what I see is, I have colleagues who literally don't have Black friends. They don't have any Black friends,
okay.
but they teach Black children. So it's like
Wow.
they only see Black kids at school. They don't have any in their lives regularly. They don't have any Black friends for real. They don't spend time with Black people. So, even things that they think are, things that I may think is completely normal coming from a Black child, they may think is something else or some sort of attitude or something. So there are a lot of issues that come with, I think, just the imbalance in the numbers.
Yeah.
Georgia, I think, is one of the states that has quite a few Black teachers, but like if you were to go to like Pennsylvania, I think Pennsylvania, only 5% of the teachers in the whole state are Black. Yeah.
5%.
Yeah, I
Wow.
think Pennsylvania is like one of the worst. That's where my family's from, so I happen to know some of the
Yeah.
statistics there. But,
That's
but yeah, I
incredible.
mean, yeah, it's scary. Like if you go to
Yeah.
apply for a job and you literally see no Black faces, I'm like,
Hmm.
well, what do the children who go to this school feel?
I was about
They
to
never see
say,
anyone.
yeah, is there a
Yeah,
sense on, because I would feel so bad, like as a student, you're this developing person, and safety and
yeah,
security are so paramount, I think, to a child's success. If a child doesn't feel safe and if they don't feel
right.
secure and they don't feel valued and loved, they're going to have a much more difficult time being able to achieve success than those who do. And so for Black and
Yeah.
brown kids, do you feel like there's this like sense of, I don't feel valued, I don't feel loved, and I don't feel safe because the people that are in charge, the people that are teaching me,
Hmm.
don't lack this, I think, perceived experience or lived experience, or just don't even understand my situation.
Right.
They lack that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, as kids, you're always looking to the adults in your life for guidance and
Hmm.
for support and just for help. And, kids always know when people don't like them. They can tell when adults don't like them and they react to the energy that you
Mm,
give towards them. And so a lot of times what I see or what I've seen is, a teacher who is very short with a child, or like, we'll get into a meeting and they'll be like, that's such and such, or they have all of this like they don't
Mhm.
reset every day. Like I always say as a teacher, you should like reset your feels
Okay.
about
Yeah.
everything every single day. You cannot drag your feelings about what a kid did 2 days ago into tomorrow, because it just doesn't work. But they just lack like the patience and the understanding, and the kids can feel that, and then the kids start reacting the same way, like they give back what they're being given. And so yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really hard spot to be a Black child, or even
Okay.
a brown child. We don't have
Yeah.
enough Hispanic
Right.
teachers either. And so to be a Black or brown child in public school and not see anybody that looks like you, is a really, really hard thing. And yeah.
Yeah. And that's something that I want to touch on, because as a white person, it's so easy for me to feel like comfortable and
Hmm.
safe, but that's because literally the society I live in has created this. This
Yes.
is, see, I think a lot of white people think that it wasn't a creation, it was just like an evolution. Like, oh no, it just so happens that there's just
It
more
was
white people than
natural.
black people. It's just natural, or that there wasn't any human intervention in this creation, and that's completely not true. This is completely societal
Right.
human construct that has happened, and it was specifically constructed to benefit white people and to be a detriment to black and brown and indigenous and Asian and other
Hmm.
people of color. And so of course it'd be easy for me to walk around and feel like, oh no, everything's great, everything's good. I don't have to worry
Yeah.
about getting hassled by police. I don't have to get worried about being hassled as a child by my teachers or by administrators.
Right.
I don't have to worry about being hassled or being discriminated against in the workplace and every other facet of society that we have to engage in. And so,
Hmm.
why do you think there's such a strong denial amongst many white people, or in ignorance, either ignorance or just flat out denial of the construct of whiteness and the construct of white supremacy and how it affects every facet of society?
Whew, that's a really that's a good question, and I've asked myself that many times, because I feel like, can't we just do better? Like
Right.
it's not that hard to do better. But
Yeah.
I think that people become really comfortable when they're at the top of the food chain,
Mm,
and it's like things are good for me. Like you said, I'm not being hassled by police. I'm not being discriminated against. Nobody's going to say, you can't wear that hair to work, or,
mm,
the way that you talk is unprofessional. Nobody's coming at you for those things.
right.
So why would you want to change society that works for you? And I think that a lot of people recognize, like, hey, things are pretty good for me. And they're not really that concerned about people that society is not so great for. And I I have the most issue with that when it comes to Christians, because
Mm,
I grew up Christian, and I always I used to say this so long ago, but I still believe it. I would say, like, the blood of Jesus is strong enough to break everything but racism somehow. Like,
wow.
you know, like,
Yeah.
it just, people are like, God can fix anything. I'm like, but we're still dealing with this here in the United States, and so many people are Christians. Like, what's up with that? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that if there's ignorance, I mean, I guess it's because maybe people close their eyes. If you can live in America right now and not believe that there's something wrong, or there is,
Right.
that some groups of people are being treated worse than other groups of people, then I think it's because you choose to believe that, or you've steeped yourself in some sort of, news that supports whatever you want to hear. So yeah, I mean, I've asked myself that. I don't know. Like, I can't imagine, like, seeing that other people are being treated like crap and being like, it's not my problem, and that's exactly what happens here in America. So
So it's just
yeah.
a virtue of selfishness then, that if I'm at the top, why would I want to lower myself to raise somebody else or give somebody equity?
I mean, I
Because it's
think
not in my
so. Yeah.
best interest or whatever.
I think it is, because I mean, even if we look at things like, there's conversations around like reparations, and people are
Right.
like, no, we don't owe them anything. Like, I don't deserve, I shouldn't have to pay that back. Or, we look at other atrocities that have happened around the world. We look at, Holocaust survivors.
Hmm.
I can't remember what it was. I was just listening to the radio, and it was Canadian, indigenous Canadians who were placed in residential schools. There was a news story about that recently, and I
Right.
used to teach about that. So they
Okay.
shared on the radio that those survivors actually received reparations from the Canadian government. And I was like, look
Wow.
at, I mean, there's so
But
many.
if Canada can do it, why can't we do it? Exactly.
Everybody,
That's
it's
so
like
frustrating.
Germany can do it,
Yep.
Canada can do it. So many other countries have recognized that when you take away a person's freedom, their right to happiness and health, and literally, I mean, Black people have been broken down from the moment that they set foot here. Like, if you look at enslavement, I mean, like we said, it's not just a physical impact, it's also like an emotional impact. Trauma, we know, like, impacts your body. it
Yep.
it doesn't leave just in your generation, you pass
Yep.
that down through
Oh,
generations.
great point.
So
Great point.
yeah, it's like, so many different areas that we've been impacted negatively. And it's like it didn't stop with slavery. Even after people were freed, like we said, people were building up and then things were destroyed. Their cities and towns and their businesses were destroyed. And then we have
Mm,
lynchings, and we have Jim Crow laws, and we
yep.
have not being able to vote through poll taxes and grandfather clauses, and you name it. And I mean, literally, I could just keep going on and on and on. Redlining, and
Okay.
I was listening to a news story 2 weeks ago about predatory, the types of loans that Black people get on houses, and I mean,
Right.
literally, you name it. Like,
Every
there's
facet,
no,
right? Every
there's
facet.
literally every facet we look at, and
Okay.
Black people have been treated really wrong. And so to see people say like, no, that was so long ago, why does that still matter? It's like, well, it still matters because everything that happened before,
Right.
causality means that things that happened before are still going to impact today. And so for people to argue so hard about those who are wronged receiving what they should have been, receiving at least something back. You really can't
Yep.
pay for destroying someone's life
Right.
or for generations,
Right.
but you can at least give something and say, I was wrong. Let me give back something so that you can try to move forward and try to shift the direction of where things are going. Because there's a lot of, there's economists, one I follow that I like a lot. He
Mhm.
tweets quite a bit, is Sandy Darity. And
Okay.
he did a study, I think it was in 2019, and said that like Black people's economic situation is going to continue to get worse. Like, even though we're
Oh,
graduating
wow.
more, Black women are the most educated group of people in America.
Damn
Like,
right. That is so true.
I
Oh
mean,
my
like, master's degree, like everybody, all my
God. A lot
friends,
of
like,
doctorates, a lot of Black
seriously,
women that have doctorate degrees. It's really
truly,
amazing.
truly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I mean,
Yep.
working so hard,
Yep.
people buying houses, putting their kids through school, you
Hmm.
name it. And our economic situation is going to continue to decline. So,
Wow.
it's just, yeah. So I
It's
have a
so
lot of thoughts about that.
so yeah, no, and man, honestly, we could probably do several parts just
Yeah,
on
yeah,
racism and whiteness because, like you said, it affects every part of
it
society.
does.
So, what have you read about why did this economist feel that even though it seems like black people are progressing
Hmm.
educationally and vocationally and personally, why is black compensation still such like why is there such a detriment still? Like
Yeah,
what are the causes? What are these it's just
that's a good
really
question.
baffling to me, and it's heartbreaking to hear that
It is.
you progress and then yet the compensation you're still going to get and the quality of life you can still receive is still going to continue to decline. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I think what so he gave like 10 reasons. He wrote like a whole he had like a whole document, and it was
Okay.
incredible. He gave like 10 different reasons, and I'm going to be honest, my memory is horrible.
No,
So
it's
I'm
okay.
not
Me
going to
too.
remember
Me
all of
too.
them, but
Yeah.
I do know that the gist of it was like we just there's no way for us to catch up even with like interest, even if we invest,
Okay.
even if we don't like have student loans or like all these different things. There's literally just no way to combat like 400 plus or whatever years of
Mhm.
not
Okay.
being able to catch up with wages. People, like even like talking about like how Black women are paid less than white men, or women
Mm.
in general are paid less than men for their
Yep.
work. And then like we just talked about like the mortgages and things like that, how we pay higher rates on different things that we want to buy. I don't remember all the reasons, but I know basically he was
But
saying
those are
that it's
good
just
ones.
impossible.
Yeah.
It's literally like impossible for us to catch up. And that we would actually like, I think he said like household wealth for Black families would be going down because it's already like 11 or 12 times less than what white people
Okay.
have. Yeah. So I actually want to go back and read it, because now that we've had the pandemic, I'm sure that his outlook might even be worse now. But
Correct.
But yeah, that's kind of what he was talking about.
It sounds like a lot of this conversation has to deal with equity versus equality. And I've heard
Oh
a lot
yeah.
of debate about equality and equity because I think for white people are very comfortable with like, oh yeah, black people, there should be equality, of course. Like there shouldn't be any kind of inferiority with white people versus other people of color.
Hmm.
But when we have the conversation about equity, which means we're having to give black and brown people more resources
Right.
we should give white people so that they can have equal footing in society,
Right.
then that just creates a disaster, and
It
white people will
does.
just rail against this idea of equality, which part of the equality conversation does include reparations.
Hmm.
And so most white people, I think, are very anti reparations because they feel, well, first of all, like I didn't own slaves and I didn't do
Right.
this and I didn't do that.
That's exactly what people say.
But
Yeah.
you made the great point that trauma is generational and trauma is perpetuated, and
Right.
how it's still perpetuated to this day. Because, like you said, even though it seems like black and brown people are improving in their status, they're still behind because
Oh
there's no
yeah.
way to ever catch up. So, make the argument for, I guess, equality over, no, excuse me, make the argument for
Equity.
equity over equality and why it's so important for white people to start talking about equity and to stop talking about maybe equality.
Ooh. So, I think equality is like a buzzword, like, oh, yeah, I believe everyone should be treated equally.
Right.
But when we look at equity, I always think about this picture, this drawing that someone did where equality is given everyone the same. If me and you are different heights
Hmm.
and they give me and you the same size stool to stand on, we might
Mm.
not be able to see over a fence to see this baseball game or whatever we're trying to
Yeah.
see. But equity would be to give me more height because I'm shorter than you so that we could be at the same spot.
Okay.
And I think that people become upset by this because they know that it requires some sacrifice. And
Okay.
yeah, and that they're not going to get to stay in that lofty spot that they've always been in. And
Mm.
so, like, I mean, people have not, I think white people have responded negatively to equity for a long time. I mean, even I know the neighborhood that I grew up in when my parents moved in was actually a mixed neighborhood. There were still white families living there.
Mm.
But as soon as they started to see black families buying the same kinds of houses that they bought, they all left. It's white flight.
White flight. Yeah.
So it's like literally anytime, that I guess that position or that power is starting to become questioned or like to be checked, I think white people become defensive and they're like, no, I
Mm.
don't want to live near. I don't want equity would be me being able to afford the same house as someone, a white person, and our kids going to the same school. They may not even want my kid to go to school with their kid.
Wow.
So and I see that a lot in the parent groups and the conversations that happen here in our public school system. There's
Mm.
a whole lot of that apartment complex doesn't need to be built here and all of that. But just to get
Yeah.
back to what you're saying, like to make a point for equity, I mean, I think it just comes down to, do you want to correct the wrongs that were done as much as you can?
Wow.
If we look at slavery and the treatment of Black people, indigenous people, really a lot of groups of people of color have been harmed by the United States. But if we look at that, that's a huge, huge problem. And I would even use the word like sin. Like a lot of people say
Yeah.
that's like America's original sin.
Yeah.
And so, like, if you really want to correct that and become a country that's moving in the right direction, we have to give people what they've been owed, and we have to try to help people to rise up to where they could be, because it's really hard. Like, it's hard to be a poor person here in the United States, or it's hard to be a Black person anyway. But like, imagine being like a poor Black person who's dealing with, we not only you're not only dealing with like the economic side, but even like medical racism and things like that. Like we said, is baked into every single layer.
Yeah.
So if we want Black people to be able to live like happy, successful, fulfilled lives the way that white people have enjoyed here in the United States, white people have to be willing to make that right, through reparations and, like you said, additional resources and things like that. And if you don't want to do it, just be honest and say we don't care that much. And I think
Okay.
that's what I think that's what most people are frustrated by, is like performative allyship, is like, oh, let me post the black box last year, and let me, pick up a book, a copy of White Fragility, or what, like, I don't have
Yeah.
anything against the book. I haven't read it because I don't think I need
It's
this
not
book,
for
but
you,
it's not for
right,
me.
right.
But it was like the whole push to do all that stuff last year. And then someone said, okay, all those companies that tweeted, Black Lives Matter, have you hired any black people? Have you, white
These are
people
good
who've
points.
done all these different things? Like, have you made any new black friends? Have you reached out to support a black business? Like, what have you actually done? And so I think the reality is, if you don't want to do it, just say we don't care that much, but stop like playing around and making it seem like you care. So yeah, I don't
That's
know if I
really
can even
important to hear for me
I don't
especially too.
yeah, I don't know if I can really make a case for it, because I think that if you are like anyone who, like I said, if your eyes are open and you see what's been going on here in the United States,
Yeah.
you should recognize that something needs to change. And so, like, if you personally deep down don't have it something in your soul that says this is wrong and we need to do better, I don't know if Black people can convince or encourage anyone to do better. I think that if our suffering hasn't been enough, or like seeing Black bodies in the streets, or
Mm.
um, you know, uh, just all the things that we go through, if that hasn't been enough to stir people to want to do better, then I think that that's just something that they lack deep down in their souls to want to do better. So yeah.
These are things we need to hear, and I'm so
Yeah.
glad you're being so honest. I think that's one thing that I'm still wrestling with
Hmm.
is I don't want to be performative. I really
Hmm.
want to find real tangible ways I can help my black and brown, people of color that I know and just the community at large with, as a white person. So I guess to close our episode, which I'd hate to, I mean, I think we could talk for hours.
Yeah,
This is
this has
so
been great.
important.
Yeah.
What are some things that white people can do to move from performative allyship, which I agree does happen frequently, and
Yeah.
it can be just as much of a problem as just dismissing it altogether or
Yeah.
ignoring it. What can we
Hmm.
do to move beyond that? And like, what would you like to see white people actually do?
Yeah.
But I know that there's some white people like myself that we're not in positions of power
Hmm.
necessarily, maybe vocationally, but we still carry privilege. We still
Hmm.
carry things that black and brown people, don't have that they should have. So what do you think we can do? What are some of the like just, I don't know, practical on the ground things that we can do to really help and not
Yeah.
be formative?
That's a great question. I think there's quite a few things. So
Okay.
I think that, in every arena that we look at, that we talked about there being an impact on Black people, there's something that white people can do. So
Okay.
when we think about like on national level as far as laws and things like that, there's an anti-lynching bill that has not been passed yet. And I know that like that's been on the table for a while. Like, I think anything that has to do with Black people, any sort of laws or bills that come
Hmm.
up that have to do with Black people, I think white people could use their voices to call their representatives
Okay.
and senators and say, hey, what's going on with this? Why is this taking so long? Where are we on this? Obviously, voting in elections for candidates that care about Black issues,
Hmm.
and care about issues that impact Black people, but also just people of color here in the United States in general. I think that on a financial level, I think that supporting Black business is huge.
Okay.
Anytime you can, I always say, like, if I can buy something, particularly from a Black woman, if I
Hmm.
can buy something from a Black woman, I will.
Okay.
I think, like, as often as possible for any sort of labor. Another big thing that was coming up last summer was white people asking for tons and tons of resources and not wanting to pay Black people who had done research and whose work that was. And so,
Okay.
like, paying Black people who are experts in these fields and things like that, supporting their books, supporting whatever projects they have coming out that are pushing this work forward. um, Obviously, if we have if there's protesting, I think putting your body
Mm.
out, as much as you can, because police have no problem hitting Black people. We saw it on the news last summer. I mean, Black bodies being beat down by police. And I was so just encouraged by white people who were like, no, I mean, literally seeing white people form like chains in
Yes.
front of Black
Yep.
people.
That's what I was about to
Um,
say. It's just so
yeah,
moving because we know that those white bodies won't be harmed
exactly.
if we can protect black bodies. And that's
Exactly.
another way we could really show up. Okay.
It's huge, yeah. And I
Okay.
would say too, like, I think the hard part is having these conversations. I enjoyed having this conversation with you because
Yeah.
I don't get a lot of white men who say, "Hey, can I have a conversation with you about racism and whiteness and like what we can do?" And I think for you, just having this conversation may even alienate you from some people who, have a problem with this stuff.
I mean,
So
maybe. Yeah.
yeah, so just having these conversations, having conversations with family members, like anybody that you can who doesn't see it or who doesn't get it, sharing resources with them so that they can start to understand. I think that a lot of times people are like, they're afraid to have those conversations with family and friends and things like that, but like I cannot go, I can't come to your family dinner table
True.
on,
Okay.
on Sunday and come sit down with your parents or whoever it is and say, like, no, these issues are real, but you're their family member. And so they're more inclined to have a conversation with you.
So,
Um,
yeah, white people having real
yeah,
conversations with their white families,
yeah, families
and
and
having those tough
yeah.
conversations.
And I
Okay.
mean, obviously, mental health matters. So I'm not going to say, go be abused by Uncle such and such who's going to yell
Right.
slurs or whatever at you. But,
Right.
it just, it's part of the work that has to be done because Black people have been trying. Like, we've been trying, we've been marching, we've done speech, we've had speeches, we've had civil rights leaders, I think we've done our part to reach white people. And now it's the time for white people to, it's been the time, but like white people have to reach other white people. And so,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah,
Thank
those
you
are just a few things.
yeah, no, thank you so much for sharing. Those are really practical tips. And honestly, what I liked is you also shared tips for a person like me.
Hmm.
Like I'm not in a power of position. I don't have, I'm not wealthy or things like that.
Hmm.
But you still gave me like practical tools that like
Yeah,
I can no longer have excuses. Like these are things that anyone can do. It doesn't matter how much you make, it doesn't matter what level of power or influence you have. These are
right.
things that you can do to leverage your privilege and really help out Black and Brown people. So,
Yeah. Oh,
thank
and
you.
one last thing. One
Go
last
ahead.
thing.
Yeah, no, go
I would
ahead.
just say call things out when you see them.
Okay.
I'm really encouraged by people who they see, they'll be in the grocery store and they'll see something happen that's inappropriate towards a Black person and they'll stand up, like literally recording things on your phone. If you see an odd interaction with the police and a Black person, like literally just like pull out your phone, so just those situations where you can speak up or just be like present or document what's going on. I think that that helps. And I know that I feel a lot safer when there's a white person around who can see what's going on with me and
Yeah.
says like, hey, that's not supposed to be happening. So again, just kind of using your position and your privilege to speak up and call things out, I think is important too.
No, really, I appreciate it. And those last few minutes, listen, guys, especially white people that are listening to this, listen to that last few minutes over and over again and really just, and myself included, I'm the first one. I'm going to be listening to this over and over again and taking Brittany's really good practical advice and really start implementing it more and putting it to good use. Because, like I said, it doesn't do Black and Brown people any good if we're just going to post a thing on social media or act like we really care, but we're not putting our bodies in it, we're not putting our finances in it, and we're not
Right.
putting our lives on the line. So, Brittany Bruton is my special guest. Thank you so much, Brittany, for being on Some Random Thoughts, having this really difficult but important conversation with me. Thank you so much for everything you've shared, all the wisdom, and just the ways that white people in particular can really step up and do more for Black and Indigenous people of color and other people of color. So thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining us.
Yeah, this was great. I really enjoyed having a conversation
And
with
we'll
you today.
definitely continue the conversation again in the future. I'd love to have you back on. And people, thank you so much for watching this or listening to this. And just remember, you have one life, make the most of it. And we'll see you next time. Take care.